Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Blue Ox base plate on a 2022 Jeep Grand Cherokee WL new body style. Now there's 5 main components required for flat towing your Jeep down the road, and starting on the vehicle side, we're going to have our base plate, and that's going to structurally attach to the frame of the vehicle, creating a mounting point for the rest of our components and making it safe to be able to pull the vehicle down the road. And that's going to have the hookups for some of the other components. So as you can see, we have the arms attached to our base plate. This goes to our tow bar, and this is going to be the connection point between the base plate on the towed vehicle and on the hitch on the RV. We also have safety cables, so just like a trailer, you want to make sure that even if any of this was to fail, we still have our cables holding it on. So on our base plate, we have our safety cable attached as well as to the hitch on the RV. We're also going to have diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light signals from the RV to the taillights on our towed vehicle, and that's where our 6-pole and an umbilical come into play. It's going to give you those running lights, turn signals, and brake lights. A braking system is also going to be required, so we have our breakaway switch mounted up here, and in case of a catastrophic disconnect, it's going to pull this cable and apply the brakes on the vehicle so it's not rolling down the road. And in our case, our braking system has this air coil because we're using air brakes from the coach. Now, a base plate is going to be crucial to flat towing your Jeep down the road, and this one is actually a pretty clean installation once it's all done. It utilizes the spot right here in the grill that perfectly fits the receptacles for our arms and our safety chain loops to pop out. It also comes with a nice bracket that allows you to hook up not only your diode wiring, but your breakaway switch. It's got a nice mount for that, which is a nice little added bonus. In our situation here, I also added an air fitting for our air brakes. And another pro is on our Trailhawk model that we have here today, we're able to retain our factory tow hooks. Now when you're ready to hook up and start flat towing, we'll get our tow bar in place and we'll get our adapter slid in our arms here and get our pin in. Now something I'll point out too, we have a Roadmaster Nighthawk tow bar, and this is working with the Blue Ox base plate. It simply comes down to when choosing a tow bar, just make sure you get those ends to match your base plate, and that's going to be the case for any tow bar out there, so you don't need to specifically get a Blue Ox. So we'll get these in place first. We'll also get our safety chains put in place. Our diode wiring. Our breakaway switch, and in our case, our air coil for our air brakes. Once you have that all hooked up, you just need to get your Jeep in flat tow mode, and then you'll be good to go. Now, as far as installation goes, this one is a little tricky. There's going to be some drilling required. There's definitely going to be some cutting on the plastics, as well as some of the stuff that you can't see behind the fascia. And yes, it will require the fascia coming off. Now, that's a good time to also get the rest of your flat tow components in place. And I'm going to show you all the steps to get it installed, but this is something that if you don't maybe have the tools to be able to accomplish this, it might be a good opportunity to reach out to one of our vendors. It's going to be a network of installers close to your area that can get this installed, but if you're handy and like to DIY, follow along and I'll walk you through to make sure you get your base plate installed. Now to begin our installation, we're going to open up our hood, and we have a fascia cover that's right here. It's just this center section, and there's going to be some plastic push pins that we need to remove. There should be 10 in total. And something that I'll point out is there's going to be a decent amount of hardware coming off that we'll have to reinstall. Highly recommend having a nice organized spot. That way when you go to reinstall everything, it'll be a little bit easier. You'll have everything set up. Plastic push pins, I'm using a trim panel tool. These are really handy for these, but if not, a flathead screwdriver works well. There's going to be a slot that's going to allow you to pop out this center section. That whole thing obviously came out, but just make sure you get the bottom part as well, and then put these back together. Now, if they don't pop out, it's going to be something a little bit more like this. You just pull that up, and then you can kind of wedge under and get this taken out. So I'll get the remainder of these out. Now with those removed, we can take our panel off and we'll set this aside. Now that's going to expose, we have these bolts here, there's 6 of them total, and they're going to be a T40 Torx bit to get those removed, so we'll go ahead and get these taken out. And we also have a 10mm bolt that's kind of on the outside edge on both sides, so we'll get that removed. Now we're going to head to each of the wheel wells and we're going to find 5 8mm screws. And the first one starts here, and then as you go down, you'll have 3 of them, and then they curve down towards the middle. So I have a electric ratchet here, so it makes it easy for me. But if you're having trouble getting access to these, you can always turn the tire. It's also a Phillips head, so if you don't have an 8mm, you can use that. But we'll go ahead and get all 5 of these removed. We're going to peel back our wheel well trim here, and it's just a series of clips. So kind of work at the bottom here first, and take your time. These clips are sometimes a little bit tricky here, and if you need to, you can kind of peel back the wheel well liner and kind of push along that to help it. And be careful, because if you pull this back too aggressively, it can create a seam in your plastic. So kind of keep this in its same contour as you work your way up. And you really only need to go back about to this section here, because that way we can get our fascia separated. You can see the seam, so if you need to, you can leave the plastic here if you're fighting it. But up top here, we have a 10mm screw. It's the head of the bolt is up top and it's facing this way. So get a socket up there and get that loosened up. Then we'll just repeat the same steps on the other side. Now head underneath the front of your fascia, and depending on your trim level, it's going to determine how many bolts there are, and there may be plastic push pins. You may have 6 bolts, you may have 9 like we have here. So pretty easy, just a 10mm across. We'll get those taken out first, and then there's 2 plastic push pins that we'll remove. Something I'll point out just to kind of help when we remove our fascia and also when putting our fascia back on, we want to make sure that anything that's rubbing, we don't want that clear coat to scratch the paint or damage the vehicle in the process. So something I'll do on these wheel well liners is just kind of fold up a rag to hold this in place. And then the seam along our front fascia and our front quarter panel, I'm just going to put painter's tape here. And again, this is just a nice, easy way to prevent any damage from occurring during the installation. Now at this point, we're ready to take our fascia off, and it definitely helps to have an extra set of hands here, not only because it gets pretty bulky, but also there's going to be electrical connectors probably on both sides, and so you'll want to support that fascia while you get those unplugged. You're also going to want to have a nice place to store your fascia while you're putting your base plate on, so get that all set up. Now to get this off, it's not too difficult. You're just going to kind of reach back on the fascia and peel, and you'll see these clips just kind of pop out. So work on both ends, getting that separated. And then as you work your way towards the middle, we'll kind of peel up on the top here to kind of work this loose. And there may be some clips along here that we're going to kind of work on. Now on the top by the grill here, we're just going to raise this up and over. And then there's 2 electrical connectors on each side. So this smaller clip, you just push back on the red tab, and that's what locks it in place. You can then push on the center tab to get the plug removed. And this is where it helps to have that extra set of hands to really be able to work on these. Sometimes they're a little bit tricky. Sometimes pushing in before you pull back will also help unseat it. So there's that. There's also this larger one that's tucked down here. I'll get this separated and show you how it goes together. So this one has a white locking tab, and if you pull that back and push on the tab, that's going to help separate this one. So go ahead and get the other side separated as well. On the passenger side, we do have that large style clip like before, but we have a small one that we need to remove. And if you're struggling, you can also push these out to give you a little bit more leverage. They just pop into that plastic, and that's going to make it a little bit easier to get these. And I think that's what I'm going to do. That's going to make it a lot easier to be able to see our clip here. Get that separated. Now, you'll also see this hose, and this is going to be for the headlight squirters. Now, what I recommend for this is have a set of vice grips set up, and this is just going to pinch the hose. That way it's not leaking any fluid. So just pinch it upstream here. And then these clips, you just push on the tall ends, and that's going to separate it, and then our vice grips are just going to make sure that's not leaking out. So now you can set your fascia aside. We're going to go ahead and get our tow hooks removed, and to get that accomplished is going to be two 16mm bolts, so we'll get those removed first. And with those bolts removed, we're going to go to the back side on the frame here, and there's going to be a large nut. It may look intimidating, but really they're generally not too tight. So I just have a pair of channel locks here. We'll just get that taken off, and then we can get our tow hook removed. Now, hopefully yours isn't too corroded. If you need to, you can put a little bit of penetrating oil to loosen that up. None of it's too bad to get off, but once we get that nut removed, we can pull out our tow hook, and we'll repeat on the other side, and we'll just set this aside for now. Now we need to get our bumper removed, and it's going to have a 16mm bolt at the top. There's also a 16mm bolt at the bottom, and then in the center here we have a 10mm nut. So we'll get these removed on both sides, and we're going to remove the bumper, and it's not getting reinstalled, so you can do whatever you want with it. Now we're going to go ahead, we're going to get our horn removed and moved out of the way for now, because we're going to be doing some work along here. So we'll get these out of the way. This is going to be on both sides too. So there's a 10mm bolt up top here on the bracket. We'll get that removed. And then this just plastic Christmas tree, as they call them, you can just push this out, or you can use a trim panel tool to pry this out. And then we'll just repeat on the other side. Now it's time for safety glasses, because we're going to be doing some cutting and trimming. The first bit that we're going to be doing is this plastic shroud. It's not my best artwork here, but I kind of marked this out, and you can follow along in the instructions on trimming out this shroud. You can use a pair of snips, you can use a Dremel, kind of whatever works best for you. I have an oscillating tool, which really seems to work well here, so we'll get this cut out. Now we're also trimming out a portion here on the frame. Now it's a little bit of plastic and then just thin metal. It's just notching this out. This one I kind of recommend maybe using a reciprocating saw, or an angle grinder works really well. So we'll get this cut out real quick. And then with that removed, I'm going to go just with a file and kind of get all the rough edges cut down, and just to make it a little bit smoother. And something else you might want to do is either with a paint marker or a little bit of spray paint, just coat up this raw metal edge. That way it doesn't turn to rust or corrosion long term. Now we're also going to be using a hole saw to create an access hole for our hardware. And the way we're going to measure that to where we're going to put that hole is from the top. There's this little lip here. Measure down 4 inches, and we're going to want to center this up, so right about here. On the passenger side, there's already a hole here, so you won't have to worry about that. Get this drilled out. And we have studs here right below where we just made our hole, and we need to get this taken out. And the best way to do that, just get a pair of vice grips, clamp that down, and just kind of wiggle this around a little bit. If you can twist it, a lot of times you can break that small tack weld on the back side out. And once it's kind of loose, you just take a hammer, hit this in, and then our stud is removed. Now only on the driver's side are we going to remove the large nut with this pipe here where our tow hook was. So this one's actually fairly loose. Just loosen this up. We're going to reinstall this later, so just set it somewhere handy. But once you get this nut taken off, we'll be able to slide the pipe out the back. Wheel well liner's kind of in the way here, but we should be able to squeeze this out. Now we're getting ready to put our base plate up, and we're going to be using those 16mm bolts that we took out for the bumper beam, and we're going to just get the top ones in place first. But before doing that, you're going to want to grab a little bit of Loctite and put this on the threads. And going forward, all the hardware that we're going to be putting in place, we do want to use some of this. It's just going to make sure that long term, it's really going to hold it in place. Even with all the vibrations from the road, it's not going to become loose over time. So you might need an extra set of hands here, but we'll raise this up, aligning these holes. I'm just going to get these top ones in place first. The top ones in place, we can then go ahead and get the bottom ones in. This is going to just make sure that everything's nice and aligned. And we are going to be tightening these down, but also use the torque settings found in the instruction manual. This is 10.9 grade hardware, so check that, and we'll get our torque dialed in on our torque wrench and get this all tightened down properly. Now I did notice the access hole that I use my hole saw on is a little bit off, and I don't know if that's I don't think it's from my measurement. It might just be a little bit of variance here, but it's about the right size. I can use that to make sure that that's drilled out. It's just going to make it easier to get that hardware fed in. Now our base plate becomes a template for where we need to drill. So you'll see that there's 4 holes here that create a little rectangle, and we're going to be using a 1/2-inch drill bit to drill these out on both sides. So go ahead with a nice sharp 1/2-inch drill bit and get this all drilled out. Now we're going to be taking our whiz nut and passing it through the access hole that we drilled, and we're going to try to get this first lower hole installed. Now this is kind of tricky. You're going to need to put some bends on here to get this to square up as much as possible, so that way you can really get this started. If you need to put some bends on it, you can actually use your safety chain loop here and just kind of bend on here. You may need to put a few different bends to be able to get to that angle. This is kind of, I think, the trickiest of them all, mostly because you really can't see where it's at, so you're going to have to kind of go on the side and try to get it as flush as possible. And even that, I might have to put an extra bend to kind of get that squared up, and then we're going to thread this in. And we're just going to get this started. We don't need to tighten it down. And make sure that this is in place. Sometimes it does feel like it's catching and it's not fully on there. We do have this attached. So at this point, you're going to grab your spacer, which looks like this, and we're going to slide this up. And then in between the base plate and the frame, the slotted end is going to go around that bolt we put in. And then we're going to need to keep this aligned when we put it in our whiz nut, so we'll do this one next, and just make sure that we have this going through the whole of our spacer. And once we get this one in place on that spacer, we'll go ahead and get the remaining ones in. And once you get all of those started on the whiz nut, we'll go ahead with a 3/4 inch socket, and I recommend not using an impact here. You don't want to break the tab because we'll need to torque that down. So just with a ratchet, I'm going to go ahead and get these snug down. Now we'll go ahead, we'll get these torqued down. Now once you get those torqued down, you still obviously have your wires here. There's a few things you can do. You can just cut them off, just kind of right there at the access hole. Also, you can kind of just bend them back and forth. You can use I got a set of channel locks here, and you can just kind of do a twisting method also. That'll work. Sometimes if you get a hammer and you hit it straight on, you basically just need to break that little tack that's holding this on. So whatever you need to do to get these removed, go ahead and do that. Now once you have all your hardware torqued down, we can go ahead and get our hook back in place. So we need to get this tube put back in. Then we'll get our large nut put back in place. And you might need to, you'll see it's kind of tight here. Maybe just cinch this back to get it started. And we'll get this tightened down first. And Now we'll get our tow hook put back in place. Just make sure you have the proper one facing up. And then we'll tighten this back bolt down. And when it comes to tightening that back nut, there is a notch that the tow hook sits in. It just kind of goes into here, and it's going to hold this in place. So I don't even have hardware in place, and this is snug this down. But speaking of hardware, we're going to get our new hardware put in. So on the top here, we have split washer, a flat washer on this bolt. And this is going to go through and get tightened down with a nylon lock nut on the back. And the bottom is going to be the same bolt hardware, but we do need to, yet again, take another whiz nut. And this actually goes through a hole here on the bottom. It's kind of an odd angle, so we're going to have to kind of get this aligned, and then we'll get this tightened in place. Now we'll get this tightened down with a 9/16 socket and a 9/16 wrench. And on this bottom one, again, since it's the whiz nut, you might want to start this with a ratcheting wrench or socket. I wouldn't use an impact quite yet. And there is going to be a torque setting associated with these, so once we get these tightened down, take your torque wrench to it. Now you're going to want to grab one of your safety cables and your quick link, and this is going to become, just in case of a catastrophic disconnect where everything was to fail, this is the final holding point to make sure it doesn't, pull the front end of the vehicle off. And really it's just going to attach to our base plate, and then we're going to want to wrap around part of the frame. So think of it, if it was to come off, you want to make sure that it's holding on. So I'll get this routed, and then I'll show you how it looks. So with your safety cables, make sure that it's not going to be rubbing against anything that will be moving, obviously, in the engine bay. But I just kind of simply wrapped it around where the body mount goes on the frame here, and that's going to create a nice solid mounting point. Now, if you need to, if there's any extra slack, you can kind of zip tie this up. Again, it's just there for last ditch. You're probably never going to have to use it. So just kind of get that nice and tidy. At this point, you can go ahead and we're going to get our horns put back in place. As far as getting fascia put back on, I would hold off, especially if you're doing the rest of your flat toe components, because more than likely you're going to want to run those wires through here to make it nice and clean, and it's way easier with the fascia taken off. And that's what we're going to do with this vehicle. So I'm going to get the rest of my flat toe components set up, and then I'll show you how to trim it and get your fascia put back on. Now we got all of our flat toe components installed on the Jeep, so we're ready to get our fascia put back on. And what we're going to need to do before we do that is get this foam piece taken off. So there's these little retaining clips. If you can, just kind of pry on these, and normally you can kind of get them off. A flathead screwdriver is going to work here, but they just kind of hold this foam piece in. You kind of have to work at these a little bit. And if you use that flathead, you can kind of just pry those tabs out, and that's going to help get that out. So if you just kind of work at each of the edges, and then just kind of wedge that screwdriver and open these up, that's going to allow these teeth to no longer bite onto that plastic. So I think that's going to be the best method. Just go from the top, give it a twist. Now once you get those clips taken out, you can take this foam off. We are not going to be reinstalling it, so you can do whatever you want with it. And what we're going to do is mock this up. Those clips kind of up top that kind of held it in place, if we can get that to hang on there, we're going to line this up, and that's really going to show us exactly where we need to cut out for any of our flat toe components. Now it's not going to go completely on, obviously, because we do have some clearance issues, but this is at least going to show us where we need to cut out. It looks like this grill is where our safety chain loops as well as the opening for our arms are going to be, and it only goes about this wide. So I'm going to cut this section out and do the same on the other. Now below this, there is an opening here, and if you haven't installed your diodes, you might be able to get this put back in without any trimming, but our breakaway switch is a little bit low, and granted this is going to kind of cinch up a little bit, but I do think I'm going to notch out a little portion here just to make clearance. So trim as necessary until you can kind of get this to seat back in place. So I got this cut out. I am going to come back with a file, but this is going to allow this to draw in a little bit more. On our bottom, it's a little tight, but I think this will drop under it and will be nice and clean here. So at this point, you can start getting your fascia put back together. Once you're happy with everything sanded down, just make sure that you're hooking up your electrical connectors and also that washer fluid line. and it's just going to be the reverse order that you took it off. So go ahead and you can get your fascia put back on. And that was a look and installation of the Blue Ox base plate on a 2022 Jeep Grand Cherokee WL new body style.